The Galactic Federation had always prided itself on being the most advanced and powerful force in the galaxy. Over the years, they had tested thousands of species in various simulations to see who could survive the harshest environments. They had developed the Deathworld simulator, a machine capable of recreating the deadliest, most hostile worlds in the universe. It was their ultimate tool for testing endurance and survival. No one, not even the toughest alien species, had managed to survive for long in the simulation. The Deathworld simulator was a marvel of technology. It could create entire planets with swirling toxic storms, dangerous creatures, and lethal terrains. The environments were so harsh that even the bravest beings struggled to last more than a few minutes. The Federation used the simulator to find the strongest species, the ones most capable of surviving under extreme conditions. For years, alien warriors, diplomats, and soldiers had entered the simulation, only to fail. None had lasted longer than the first wave of threats. The Federation had come to believe that no species, not even the most powerful ones in the galaxy, could survive the full extent of the simulator's challenges. But when a human, a young soldier named Kale, volunteered to face the Deathworld simulator, the Federation didn't expect much. Humans were, in their eyes, weak and fragile compared to the powerful species of the galaxy. They were curious to see how long this human could last, but they didn't believe he would even survive. The first challenge. Kale wasn't a typical soldier. He had been trained in some of the harshest conditions humanity had to offer. But his resilience wasn't just physical, it was mental. He had a gift, an ability to remain calm and focused no matter what danger lay ahead. And it was that gift that had made him volunteer for the simulation. When Kale stepped into the Federation's main testing chamber, he wasn't nervous. He looked around at the various control panels, the screens that monitored his every move, and the faces of the Federation officials who were watching him. There was no fear in his eyes, only calm determination. "You sure you want to do this?" one of the Federation officers asked him. "Once the simulation starts, there's no turning back." Kale simply nodded, his face a mask of confidence. "I'm ready." The officer smiled, a little amused. He thought this human would break quickly like all the others. But there was something about Kale that made him hesitate for a moment. He pressed a button, and the simulation began. Kale was immediately thrown into an alien world. The air was thick and suffocating, filled with strange chemicals that burned his lungs with every breath. The ground beneath his feet was uneven and cracked, the soil black and ash-like. In the distance, he could see massive creatures moving across the horizon, their forms casting long shadows as they roamed the toxic wilderness. He could hear the creatures growling, their claws scraping the earth as they moved. Some were small, others were enormous, each one designed to test his survival skills in a different way. The Federation watched as Kale's movements were displayed on their monitors. They had seen many others struggle in similar situations, but Kale didn't flinch. He didn't show fear. He simply began to walk, scanning his surroundings with sharp eyes. "Let's see how long he lasts," one of the officers said, leaning back in his chair, clearly entertained. But Kyle wasn't worried. He had faced dangers like this before. He knew how to remain focused, how to keep his mind clear in the face of overwhelming odds. As the first creature approached, a giant, lizard-like beast with claws as sharp as knives, Kale didn't panic. Instead, he crouched low and studied its movements. The creature didn't notice him at first. It was focused on something else, moving slowly through the wasteland. Kale took a deep breath, crouching further to stay hidden. When the beast finally turned, Kale was ready. With a swift motion, he darted to the side, avoiding the creature's deadly claws by mere inches. He didn't stop to watch it, didn't waste time thinking about what could have happened if he hadn't moved in time. He just kept moving, his feet carrying him across the dangerous landscape. The Federation officials watched in disbelief. No one had ever survived the first encounter with the creatures. They began to adjust the simulation, making the environment more dangerous, adding more creatures, and increasing the difficulty. But Kyle was unshaken. He continued to move through the simulation, avoiding the creatures, finding shelter, when He needed it, and using the landscape to his advantage. He was learning the world, adapting to it faster than the Federation had anticipated. Hours passed, and still, Kale showed no signs of slowing down. The Federation kept increasing the difficulty, but nothing seemed to faze him. The environment became even more hostile. Sudden storms, volcanic eruptions, and more deadly creatures. Each new challenge was designed to overwhelm him, to break him. But Kale adapted, using everything he had learned to survive. Finally, after hours of surviving in the brutal world, Kale made a bold request. He asked the Federation to blindfold him. The Federation officers exchanged confused looks. No one had ever requested to be blindfolded during the simulation. It seemed like a sure way to end his survival. But Kale was insistent. "I'll be just fine," he said calmly, looking up at the Federation officials from the screen. "Blindfold me." Reluctantly, they agreed, thinking that this would be the final step toward his defeat. They placed a blindfold over his eyes, and Kale stepped back into the simulation. At first, the Federation was certain it would be the end for him. They expected him to stumble, to be overwhelmed by the creatures and terrain. But what they saw, instead, was something they couldn't explain. Kyle's movements were fluid, confident, and precise. Without being able to see, he relied on his other senses, his hearing, his sense of smell, and his incredible memory of the terrain. He moved faster, smarter, and more effectively than any of them had ever seen. He wasn't just surviving the Deathworld simulator, he was mastering it. The Federation's control room buzzed with activity as Kale stepped back into the Deathworld simulator. His blindfold was secure, a black cloth that covered his eyes completely, blocking out his vision. The officers in the control room exchanged curious glances. No human had ever asked for a blindfold during the simulation. Most beings would have asked for help or protection when faced with such danger, but Kale seemed confident, almost too confident. "What is he thinking?" one of the officers asked, clearly puzzled. "Does he really believe this will help him?" Another officer responded, "I'm not sure, but I've never seen anyone survive this long, even without a blindfold." They all turned their attention to the screens, eager to see what would happen. The simulation was set to its most difficult environment yet. The planet was now covered in jagged mountains, poisonous swamps, and dense, toxic forests. The air was thick with a foul stench that burned the lungs. The ground was unstable, cracking open every few seconds, revealing glowing lava beneath. As the simulation began, Kyle stood motionless, his body perfectly still. The officers watched his every move, expecting him to stumble or panic. It had been hours since the simulation started, and the Federation had thrown every possible threat at him. Yet here he was, still alive, still moving forward. They had sent towering alien beasts after him, creatures with razor-sharp claws and towering fangs. They had set storms that could tear apart entire cities, earthquakes that shook the planet to its core, and predators that hunted him without rest. Yet, Kyle had outsmarted them all. Now, with his blindfold securely in place, Kale was faced with even more danger. A giant creature, an enormous lizard-like beast with armored scales and glowing red eyes, appeared before him. The officers in the control room leaned forward, their eyes glued to the screen. The beast let out a deafening roar as it charged at Kale, its claws raised, ready to tear him apart. But Kale didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the creature. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, listening carefully to the sound of the creature's approach. He could hear its heavy footsteps, the thud of its massive body moving through the rocks. Kale waited, his body perfectly still. At the last moment, just as the creature lunged at him, Kale sidestepped with a speed and precision that left the officers in the control room speechless. The beast's claws scraped against the air where Kale had been standing, missing him by mere inches. Kale moved silently through the battlefield, his every action deliberate. He didn't need to see the creature. He could hear it. He could feel it. The officers were stunned. They had never seen anything like this before. How was Kale able to avoid such a dangerous creature without even looking? This isn't possible," one officer muttered under his breath. "How can he do this?" Another officer responded, "He's using his senses, His instincts, but it's not just that. He's calculating everything. He's reacting faster than any being I've seen. Kale's movements were fluid, his body moving in perfect harmony with the environment. As the creature continued to pursue him, Kale used the terrain to his advantage. He ducked behind rocks, scaled cliffs with ease, and leaped over obstacles, without hesitation. His senses were heightened, his mind working faster than the Federation had ever expected. It was as if he had become part of the world itself. The Federation officers scrambled to increase the difficulty once again. They programmed more challenges into the simulation, hoping to overwhelm Kale. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet began to tremble, and a massive fissure appeared in the earth, splitting the planet in two. A powerful earthquake rocked the landscape, sending shockwaves through the area. Kyle was thrown off balance, but he quickly regained his footing, steadying himself with a deep breath. He didn't waste time trying to fight the quake. He simply moved with it, using the force of the tremor to propel himself forward. More dangers followed: poisonous plants that released toxic gas into the air, giant creatures with teeth sharp, enough to shred metal, and unstable terrain that threatened to collapse at any moment. The officers increased the difficulty even further, sending a massive storm of acid rain, lightning, and winds that could tear apart entire cities. But Kale didn't slow down. With each new threat, he became more focused. The Federation officers were beginning to understand that Kale was no ordinary human. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. His blindfold had become an asset, not a handicap. It forced him to rely on his other senses: his hearing, his sense of smell, his ability to feel the vibrations in the ground. Every step he took was carefully measured, every movement purposeful. As Kale navigated the treacherous landscape, the Federation officers began to see something they hadn't expected: respect. They couldn't help but admire him. The humans they had previously dismissed as weak were proving to be something entirely different, stronger, smarter, and more resilient than they could have ever imagined. "Are we really watching this?" one of the officers whispered in disbelief. "He's blindfolded, and he's beating everything we throw at him." The room fell silent as they continued to watch the screens. Kyle was no longer just a subject. He was a challenge. A human was overcoming everything the Federation had designed to break him. Another officer spoke up, his voice full of awe. "This human is different. He's not just reacting. He's planning ahead, predicting the dangers before they even happen. He's thinking faster than we ever thought possible." Kale moved deeper into the simulation, his surroundings becoming more dangerous with every passing minute. But he didn't stop. He didn't hesitate. His focus remained sharp, his determination unwavering. The officers could see it in his every move. Kale wasn't just surviving, he was dominating the Deathworld simulator, blindfolded. As the hours passed, the Federation's amusement began to turn into something else: respect. They had underestimated this human, and now they were witnessing a new kind of power. It wasn't physical strength or speed, it was something deeper. Kale's mind, his ability to adapt and overcome, was what made him so formidable. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Kale paused. He stood tall in the middle of the chaos, breathing deeply. The storm raged around him. The ground shook beneath his feet, and creatures continued to stalk him from every direction. But Kyle didn't move. He simply stood there, waiting. And as the Federation watched in stunned silence, Kyle took a step forward, his movements as confident as ever, ready to face whatever came next. The Federation's control room was filled with tension as they watched Kale, blindfolded, move effortlessly through the dangerous terrain of the Deathworld simulator. They had never seen anything like it before. The human soldier had already survived countless trials, each more deadly than the last. And now, blindfolded, he was still pushing forward, unshaken by the chaos around him. "This can't be real," one of the officers muttered under their breath, staring at the screen. "No one should be able to do this." But Kyle wasn't just surviving the deadly environment. He was thriving. The Federation had thought they could overwhelm him, that they could break him. But Kyle had become a force in his own right, using the very dangers they had thrown at him to his advantage. Where others would have been paralyzed by fear, Kale remained calm, calculating every step, every move. The planet had already gone through a series of brutal tests: massive predators, unpredictable earthquakes, and toxic gas clouds. The terrain had shifted from a barren wasteland to a dense, sweltering jungle with plants that could tear through flesh and creatures that hunted by sound. Yet each time, Kale had adapted. His senses were his greatest tool, and he used them to read the environment, moving with such precision that it almost seemed like he had an unfair advantage. But this next challenge would be the one that would test him the most. The Federation had one last trick up their sleeve. A creature so dangerous, so terrifying, that no one had ever survived its attack. They activated the simulation's final level, and a massive mechanical monster appeared on the horizon. Its body was made of steel, its movements smooth and deliberate. This machine, known as the Titan, was a machine of war, designed to destroy anything that came its way. The Titan was equipped with advanced weaponry, armored plating, and a massive, spinning blade that could slice through anything in its path. It was a fearsome creation, something the Federation had designed to be the final test for any who dared to enter the simulator. As the Titan approached, the officers in the control room leaned forward, their eyes wide. The Federation had programmed the Titan to hunt down and destroy the intruder. Its sensors were set to detect movement, and its weapons would not hesitate to strike. Kyle, still blindfolded, stood in the middle of the wasteland, unaware of the beast closing in on him. But that didn't matter. Kale had already sensed its approach. He could feel the vibrations in the ground, hear the subtle whirring of the Titan's engines, and the rhythmic pounding of its footsteps. His mind was sharp, his senses alive with the chaos of the simulation. He knew the Titan was coming, but he didn't fear it. Instead, he focused, blocking out everything except the sound of the approaching machine. The Federation officers watched in anticipation, knowing that Kale had no chance against the Titan. They had programmed it to be invincible. No one had ever lasted more than a few moments against its relentless assault. But Kyle didn't rush into the confrontation. He didn't panic. Instead, he waited, letting the Titan come to him. As the Titan closed the distance, Kyle moved. With a swift, calculated movement, he darted to the side, just out of reach of the Titan's massive blade. The machine swung at him, its blade slicing through the air with terrifying speed. But Kale was already moving again, his feet light and fast, his mind working faster than the machine could react. The Federation officers were silent, watching in disbelief as Kyle danced around the Titan. Every time the machine struck, Kale dodged, his movements fluid and precise. He wasn't just running, he was calculating every step, every angle. He could hear the Titan's movements, could feel the slight tremor in the ground as it shifted position. And with each passing second, Kyle got closer to his goal. The Titan's weapon was powerful, but it was also cumbersome. It couldn't keep up with Kale's speed. The human soldier had already outsmarted the Federation's most advanced creation. Kale didn't just avoid the Titan. He began to analyze it, looking for weaknesses, searching for a way to disable the beast. He could hear the hum of its engines, the slight shift in its movements. He could smell the burning fuel from its internal systems. And in that moment, Kale realized something that the Federation hadn't anticipated. The Titan wasn't perfect. It had blind spots, weaknesses in its design. With a deep breath, Kale moved forward again, darting between the Titan's attacks with lightning speed. He approached the machine from behind where its sensors couldn't see him. The Titan spun around, its blade swinging wildly, but Kale had already anticipated this. He leaped to the side, his body twisting in the air as he landed on the ground with barely a sound. The Federation officers were frozen in shock. They had never seen anything like this. Kyle, blindfolded, was outsmarting the Titan with ease. His movements were becoming more confident, more sure of himself. He wasn't just surviving the Deathworld simulator anymore, he was mastering it. With each successful dodge, Kale grew more comfortable, more in control. He wasn't just reacting to the Titan's attacks, he was predicting them, moving ahead of the machine's next move. And then, Kale made his move. In one swift motion, he jumped onto the Titan's back, using his agility to climb up its armored body. The machine whirred, its sensors detecting the human's movement, but it was too late. Kale had already found the weakness. He reached into the machine's exposed engine compartment and pulled a small lever. The Titan's systems shut down, its massive body stumbling as the lights flickered and went out. The control room fell silent. The Federation officers couldn't believe their eyes. Kyle had done it. He had defeated the Titan, the most dangerous creation they had ever designed. And he had done it blindfolded. Kale stood atop the fallen machine, his chest heaving with exhaustion. But there was no sign of fear on his face, no hint of doubt. He had won. Against all odds, he had defeated the Deathworld simulator. The officers, in the control room, were still speechless. No one had ever beaten the simulator in this way. They had thought they could break Kale, that they could overwhelm him with the dangers of the simulation. But instead, they had created something that only made him stronger. Kale had shown them the true power of humanity. It wasn't just about strength or speed. It was about adaptability, resilience, and the ability to think and act when the odds were against you. And Kale had proved that in the end, humans were capable of far more than the Federation had ever imagined. In the control room of the Galactic Federation, the mood had shifted. The officers were no longer laughing or mocking. The human soldier, Kyle, had not only survived the impossible, he had outsmarted their best weapon, the Titan. He had done the unthinkable. He had beaten the most dangerous, deadly creation they had ever designed. And he did it blindfolded. Now the Federation's pride was on the line. This is impossible, one officer whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. No one should be able to do this. We've pushed him to the limit, another officer said, shaking his head. We've thrown everything at him, but he keeps coming back. In the simulation, Kale stood on top of the fallen Titan, his breathing steady and controlled. He didn't appear tired, nor did he seem shaken. The chaos of the battle was over, and he was calm, almost as if the destruction around him was just another day at the office. The officers in the control room had thought that the Titan would break him. After all, no one had ever survived a direct attack from such a powerful machine. But Kale had not only survived, it was as though he had taken the machine's power and turned it against itself. The Federation had misjudged the human. They hadn't anticipated his ability to think on his feet, to use his environment and his instincts to outwit even the most advanced technology. The Federation was stunned. They had underestimated Kale in every way possible, and now they were faced with a decision. Should they stop the simulation and declare Kale the victor? Or should they push him further, try to break him with something even worse? We can't let him win, one of the senior officers said, his voice cold. We've invested too much into this. We need to break him. We need to show that the Deathworld simulator is unbeatable. Another officer looked at the screens, his fingers hovering over the controls. If we do this, we might push him too far. We could lose him. The first officer scoffed. He's just a human. What more can he do? With a grim look, he pressed a button on the control panel. The planet's surface began to shake once more. The screen showed that the environment was changing again, becoming more hostile, more dangerous. A new challenge was about to begin. Back in the simulation, Kale didn't flinch. He had already learned to expect the unexpected. The terrain beneath him began to rumble, and the sky above darkened, filled with swirling clouds. The ground cracked open, releasing steam and smoke. Massive fissures appeared, each one wide enough to swallow entire buildings. It was clear that the Federation had something even more dangerous in store. A loud roar echoed through the air, followed by the sound of something massive moving toward him. Kale listened carefully, his ears trained to pick up the faintest vibrations in the air. The ground trembled beneath his feet, signaling the arrival of something much bigger than the Titan. From the smoke and rubble, a new creature emerged. It was enormous, much larger than anything Kale had faced so far. The creature resembled a giant armored scorpion, its massive pincers clicking together with a sharp, menacing sound. Its body was covered in thick, metal-like armor, and it had glowing eyes that seemed to burn with malice. As it moved closer, the air around it began to feel electric, crackling with energy. Kale's expression didn't change. He didn't even hesitate. He stood tall, his body poised and ready. The Federation officers watched as the new creature, which they had dubbed the Scorpion King, charged toward Kale, its pincers snapping in the air. "This is it," one officer said. "The Scorpion King is our last weapon. If he can survive this, we'll have to rethink everything we know about humans." But Kale was already moving. He didn't wait for the creature to reach him. As the Scorpion King lunged at him, Kale sidestepped with the precision of a seasoned warrior. He didn't have time to think, only to react. The creature's pincers swiped through the air, missing Kale by inches. He moved again, faster this time, staying just out of the Scorpion King's reach. The officers in the control room watched, in awe. He's moving faster than we thought possible," one officer muttered. "How is he doing this?" But Kale wasn't just surviving the creature's attacks. He was learning, adapting to the creature's movements. He could hear the sound of its claws scraping the ground, the soft growl it made as it prepared to strike again. Each time the Scorpion King attacked, Kale reacted with a move that was even more precise, more deliberate. The creature charged again, but this time, Kale didn't dodge. He waited, standing still, feeling the vibrations in the ground beneath him. The moment the creature's pincers came down, Kale dropped to the ground, narrowly avoiding the strike. He rolled out of the way, coming up on the other side of the creature. The Scorpion King turned, its glowing eyes fixed on Kale. It charged again, faster this time, but Kale was ready. As the creature moved in, Kale made his move. He darted forward, his hands reaching for the exposed joints in the creature's armor. With incredible strength, he ripped off one of the creature's massive pincers, using it as a weapon. The Federation officers gasped as they saw Kale use the Scorpion King's own pincer against it. Kale didn't waste any time. He slammed the pincer into the creature's soft underbelly, hitting it with all his strength. The creature let out a screech, thrashing in pain. Kyle didn't stop. He continued to strike, using the pincer like a spear, aiming for the creature's weak spots. Finally, after a few well-placed blows, the Scorpion King fell to the ground, its body twitching as it lost its battle with the human. The control room fell silent. The officers couldn't believe their eyes. Kyle had done it again. He had defeated another monster, and this time he had used its own weapon against it. One officer turned to the others, his voice shaking. "We've never seen anything like this. He's unstoppable." Another officer spoke up, his tone filled with regret. "We pushed him too far." But it was too late. Kale stood over the fallen creature, his breath steady. He didn't look tired or afraid. He had overcome the odds again, and he had done it without hesitation. The Federation's last weapon had failed. The human had proved that no matter how powerful their creations were, they could not defeat him. The Federation had underestimated Kyle, and now they were left with no choice but to accept the truth. Humanity was not to be taken lightly. The Federation's control room was silent. Every officer, every general, every high-ranking official in the room was watching Kale with a mix of awe, fear, and disbelief. They had pushed him to his limits, created monsters, deadly environments, and impossible scenarios. But he had survived them all. He had beaten the Titan. He had defeated the Scorpion King. And now, after all that, Kale stood at the center of the simulation, still alive and still unbroken. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, knowing that there was no way they could let him leave without one final test. They had to break him. They had to prove to themselves and to the galaxy that humanity was not as unbeatable as it seemed. One officer, a high-ranking general, stood up from his chair. "We've seen enough. He's far too resilient, but we can't let him walk away, thinking he's conquered everything. Prepare the final test." With a grim expression, he walked over to a control panel, typing in a series of commands. The walls of the control room seemed to buzz with an unnatural hum as the Federation began to set up their last, most dangerous challenge. Back in the simulation, Kale felt the change in the atmosphere. The air grew thick and heavy. The temperature dropped and the sky above him darkened to a deep shade of red. He could feel the weight of the challenge pressing down on him, but his focus never wavered. He had come this far, and he would face whatever came next with the same calm determination that had gotten him through the previous tests. The Federation's officers watched as the simulation shifted again, becoming a battlefield unlike any they had created before. This time, the environment was a blend of everything Kale had already faced: towering mountains, thick jungles, dark caves, and an endless stretch of desert. But now, the real danger came not from the environment, but from the Federation's final weapon. On the horizon, a new force appeared, an army of soldiers. They were not like the creatures Kale had already defeated. These soldiers were humanoid, just like him. They were specially designed by the Federation to be perfect warriors, a blend of alien technology and genetic enhancements. They were faster, stronger, and more ruthless than any soldier Kale had ever faced. There were hundreds of them, all equipped with the latest weapons and armor. The Federation had not only thrown raw power at Kale, now they were testing his ability to fight not just one, but an entire army. They were testing his endurance, his mind, and his skill as a warrior. Kale could hear their footsteps as they marched toward him. He stood still, listening, waiting. The sound of their boots on the ground grew louder, echoing in the silence of the simulated world. He could feel the tension in the air. He knew what was coming. But unlike the titans and monsters before, this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about strategy. It was about facing the impossible, not with brute force, but with intelligence and skill. The first soldier broke into a run, charging at Kale with a battle cry. Kale didn't move at first. He didn't need to. The soldier was fast, but Kale was faster. He sidestepped at the last second, grabbing the soldier's arm and twisting it behind him. With a sharp twist, Kale disarmed the soldier, knocking his weapon to the ground. Before the soldier could react, Kale had already moved on to the next threat. A second soldier appeared, rushing at him with a blade. Kale ducked, avoiding the swing, and with a quick motion, he grabbed the soldier's legs, flipping him onto the ground. The soldier's weapon fell from his hand, and Kale was already on top of him, pinning him down. The Federation officers watched in disbelief. Kale wasn't just fighting. He was controlling the battlefield, disarming his opponents, and taking them out with precision. The soldiers, trained to be the best warriors in the galaxy, were no match for his quick thinking and ability to read the situation. The army of soldiers continued to advance, each one coming at him, one after the other. They were faster now, more coordinated, but Kale didn't flinch. He moved through the soldiers like a whirlwind, using their own momentum against them. Each soldier that came at him was disarmed, thrown to the ground, or incapacitated before they could land a single blow. The Federation watched as their soldiers were beaten one by one. "This is impossible," one officer whispered, his voice filled with shock. "He's taking them out like they're nothing." The general beside him scowled. "He's good, but we're not done yet. We've created the perfect soldiers. There's no way he can beat all of them." But Kale wasn't done either. He had already taken down dozens of soldiers, but the army kept coming. The Federation continued to send wave after wave, determined to break him. But Kale wasn't just fighting the soldiers, he was adapting. He was thinking ahead, calculating each move as if it were a game of chess. He knew that the longer he fought, the more likely it was that fatigue would set in, but he also knew that he could use his environment to his advantage. As the final wave of soldiers appeared, Kyle knew this was his last challenge. He could feel his energy waning, but he refused to stop. The Federation had underestimated him, and now he would prove that humans were capable of far more than they realized. The soldiers charged at him once again, but Kyle was ready. He used his surroundings, rocks, trees, and even the wreckage from the earlier battles, to his advantage. He turned the battlefield into a trap, using his knowledge of combat and strategy to outmaneuver every soldier that came at him. With one final move, Kale took down the last of the soldiers, his body moving with a speed and grace that left the Federation speechless. He stood in the center of the battlefield, breathing heavily but unbroken. The Federation officers were silent. They had thrown everything at him, monsters, machines, and an army of perfect soldiers. And yet Kale had beaten them all. He had proven that no matter how powerful the challenge, no matter how impossible the odds, humanity was capable of overcoming anything. Kale had not only survived the Deathworld simulator, he had conquered it. This is part 5 of your story, where Kale faces the Federation's final challenge, a coordinated army of perfect soldiers. With skill, strategy, and resilience, Kale triumphs once again, proving humanity's strength and adaptability. Let me know if you'd like any changes. The control room was silent. The Federation officers were staring at the monitors, eyes wide in disbelief. Kyle, the human soldier, had done it. He had conquered the Deathworld simulator. The endless waves of monsters, the Titan, the Scorpion, King, and the army of perfect soldiers, Kale had beaten them all. The Federation had created the most brutal test imaginable, and a single human had overcome it without even breaking a sweat. The officers were left stunned, unsure of how to proceed. For years they had believed that no species could withstand the brutal challenges of the Deathworld simulator. They had thought that their advanced technology and unbeatable creatures would break even the toughest warriors. But Kale had proved them wrong. He had shown them something they hadn't expected, the true strength of humanity. "It's over," one officer muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "He's won." The general in charge of the Federation's testing program stood at the front of the room, his face set in a tight frown. "We can't let him leave like this. He's proven himself. But we can't allow a human to be seen as the victor here. We have to stop him before he leaves with that kind of reputation." Another officer, the one who had been skeptical of Kale's chances from the start, looked at the general in confusion. "But he's already beaten everything we've thrown at him. What else can we do?" The general didn't answer immediately. He turned back to the monitors, watching Kale in the simulation. The human was standing tall in the center of the battlefield, breathing heavily but still looking unbroken. The environment around him was chaotic, torn apart by the destruction of the earlier battles, but Kale didn't seem to care. He had survived, and now, for the first time since the simulation began, he was standing in the quiet aftermath, waiting. "We have one last option," the general said finally, his voice cold. "It's the final contingency we've put in place for situations like this. If Kale has truly beaten everything we've thrown at him, then it's time to see if he can survive the real test." The other officers looked at each other nervously. "What's the plan?" one of them asked. The general didn't answer. Instead, he typed a series of commands into the control panel, and the simulation began to change once again. Kyle stood in the center of the battlefield, his body still aching from the intense combat. He had beaten everything the Federation had thrown at him, but he knew that they wouldn't stop until they had pushed him to his limits. He had seen the way they had reacted to his victories, how they had watched him with growing concern as he dismantled their most dangerous creations. They wanted to break him, to show the galaxy that humanity wasn't as strong as they thought. Kyle was ready for whatever came next. He didn't know what the Federation would throw at him, but he was prepared to face it, just as he had faced everything else. He knew that his survival depended not just on his physical abilities, but on his mind, his ability to stay calm, stay focused, and think strategically. As he stood there, the ground beneath him trembled. The sky above darkened, and a deep rumbling sound echoed through the air. He turned, his senses alert. This was different from the previous challenges. The air felt heavy, charged with something he couldn't quite place. Suddenly, the ground cracked open and a massive figure emerged from the earth. It was like nothing Kale had seen before. The creature that emerged was enormous, towering over the battlefield. Its body was made of dark metallic armor, and its eyes glowed with an eerie light. It moved slowly but with a sense of purpose, each step causing the earth to shake beneath it. The officers in the control room watched with growing tension. The creature was the Federation's final contingency, a weapon that had never been used before. It was a war machine, a being of pure destruction, designed to be the ultimate challenge. They had never unleashed it in a simulation, but now they had no choice. "This is it," the general said, his voice grim. "Let's see if he can survive the final Guardian." Back in the simulation, Kale analyzed the creature. It was massive, armored, and seemed nearly indestructible. But Kale knew that brute force alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to outthink it, to find a way to turn the creature's power against it. The Guardian let out a low growl, a sound that seemed to shake the very air around Kale. It lunged forward, its massive claws aimed directly at him. Kale didn't hesitate. He dove to the side, rolling across the rocky ground. The Guardian's claws struck the ground where he had been, standing, sending debris flying in all directions. Kale sprang to his feet, his mind already calculating his next move. The Guardian was slow, but its power was overwhelming. He couldn't afford to fight it head-on. He needed to find a weakness, and fast. He darted to the side, weaving through the rubble, using the terrain to his advantage. The Guardian followed, its massive form easily crushing anything in its path. Kyle waited for the perfect moment, his eyes focused on the creature's movements. He could hear the sound of its massive feet thundering against the ground, and he knew that he had to act quickly. The Guardian swung its arm again, but Kale wasn't there. Instead, he was already behind it, his hand reaching for a piece of the broken terrain. With a swift motion, he hurled it at the Guardian's exposed side. The creature roared, but the strike didn't slow it down. Kyle wasn't done yet. He needed more than just distractions. As the Guardian turned, Kyle leaped onto its back, using every ounce of his strength to climb the massive creature. He reached for the exposed panel on the Guardian's back, his fingers digging into the seams of its armor. With a grunt of effort, Kale pried open the panel, exposing the core of the creature's power source. He didn't hesitate. Kale pulled out a device from his belt, a small explosive charge designed for situations just like this. With a quick motion, he planted it in the exposed core, then jumped off the Guardian's back, landing just out of range of the explosion. The Federation officers watched in horror as the explosion rocked the battlefield. The Guardian's body erupted in a blinding flash, its armored form collapsing under the force of the blast. Kale stood at a distance, breathing heavily, his blindfold still in place. He had done it. He had defeated the final Guardian. The control room was silent once again. The officers were stunned. The Federation's final weapon had been destroyed, and Kyle had done it with the same calm precision that had carried him through every challenge before. The human soldier had beaten them all. He had proven that no matter how powerful their creations were, they could not defeat him. The general stood up, his face expressionless. He knew the truth now. Kale had not only survived the Deathworld simulator, he had conquered it. The Federation had no choice but to accept the reality. Humanity was not to be underestimated. This is part 6 of your story, where Kale faces the Federation's final weapon, the final Guardian. Once again, Kale uses his intelligence and resourcefulness to defeat an overwhelming challenge, proving humanity's resilience. Let me know if you'd like any changes. Oh, Minnie.